Okay, today this tutorial is just going to have a wee look at introducing you to creating tweens within Flash CS6. So the example that I have at the moment on the screen or in the workspace shows three shapes, each being tweened with three keyframes in particular. Okay, so if I was to play the animation for you here, you'll see them moving along the timeline over 2 seconds in total. So we're running at 24 frames per second, which gives us 2 seconds in total, 48 frames of information. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new document and I'm going to just repeat this process and have a wee look at emphasising the importance of keyframes and also how to adjust them and change the properties of the information of the keyframes and how that can affect then the tween or the animation of the objects or shapes that you're using. So I'll create a new document and I'm just going to use the same dimensions that I've used in the moment, just a nice kind of widescreen look to it. And I'm going to start off by creating a square. So I'm going to get my rectangle tool here. I'm going to select a colour and I'm going to hold down Shift, which is going to constrain the proportions for me. Okay, if I don't, then I'm loosely being able to create a rectangle. So if I hold down Shift, I can create a perfect square. I'll lock that layer and generate a new layer, and this is going to be my circle. Oops. I'm just going to choose a new colour for that, and on this keyframe here I'm going to select the oval tool and generate a circle. Okay, I can select that and move it about just so that they're roughly in the same position. I'll create a new layer and I'm just going to create a triangle, which I'm going to have to use a drawing tool for that. So I'm going to use my pen tool and I'll go for this blue colour here. So I'm just going to click, 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 come back and close my shape, and then use my paint bucket tool to fill the shape. Okay, now I can use my direct selection tool, or sub-selection tool, which is going to allow me to grab these points and move them and tweak them if needs be. Okay, so there's my rough triangle. Now what I'm going to do is generate the tween. At this stage, however, I'll just mention, if we go back and have a look, you'll notice I do not have any outlines around these shapes. That's purely just aesthetics, but if that's something that you're looking to try and get rid of, you can select, and I'll go back to the square layer, you can individually select these lines or use the whole object, select the whole object with your selection tool. If I hold in the Shift key and click on the fill colour, I can simply just delete the outline colour. Okay, so I'll do that in the square, but I'll leave the rest of them as they are. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at converting these into graphics or symbols. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is select the keyframe or the information, the object that we have here. I'm going to right click on the object and go to convert symbol, and it'll bring up this dialog box. So we're going to keep it as a graphic, and we're going to keep the registration, which is going to be the pivot point, rotation point of the object in the centre. And we're just going to name this square. So when I OK that, you'll notice this wee light blue box appears around it, and here we have this rotation or pivot point. You'll also notice that the properties window here starts to kind of change, and we have a few more options of what we didn't have before when the image was just a bitmap standalone graphic. Okay, so it's now embedded within Flash as being a symbol, and it should appear in my library here also. Okay, and we'll look at symbols and importance in another couple of tutorials, but they're handy kind of creations to have within Flash. Allows you to easily manipulate them and change them, and as I said, it gives you a few more properties that we can play about with, which we'll see in a wee second. So I'm just going to repeat this process, call the circle the circle, there we go, OK that, and do the same with the triangle. So I have that selected at the moment. Reason it's selected is just because I'm selecting that frame, which is picking up everything that's on the frame. Okay, if I deselect that just by clicking off, I can select it again using the selection tool. So I'm going to convert this to my symbol and call this my triangle. And OK that. Right, so I'm now ready to start thinking about creating motion tweens, and we're just going to start off with something very basic. Now, all I want to do is be able to move this square from this side of the screen to this side of the screen, and I'm going to make the animation last for 2 seconds. So if we're running 24 frames per second, and we know that at 24 frames that's going to equal 1 second of animation, so 48 frames is going to equal 2 seconds of animation. So what I'm going to do is right click and copy this first frame, and I'm going to move along to 48th frame. I'm just left clicking here on the time frame, right clicking and pasting the frame. So I now have a copy of this. You can see that the other frames have disappeared, the other shapes rather, and that's simply because along the timeline there's no representation, there's nothing to say that they are visible. So after that first frame they will disappear. Okay, and we'll notice that there's no difference or change in the position or information of this box at this point in time. So then what we're going to do is we're going to look at changing the position of this box, and what I'm going to do is select a keyframe. There's a couple of ways I can do this. I can just use the move tool and I can move it about. I'm just going to Command Z that. I can hold down Shift, which should lock it or constrain the proportion, lock it to vertical or horizontal axis when I'm moving it. Or I can go over here to my properties and I can use my X or Y axis here. Okay, so I'm just going to grab the X axis, X position rather, and just going to roll it over. Okay, and when I grab the slider here to start moving the animation back and forward, you'll see that it's jumped back again. So for these 47 frames, the square is in this position, and then in the 48th it jumps. This is where we're going to use the classic tween. So if I right click in this grey area here to get my options up, remember when you're using Flash, or in fact pretty much when you're using any kind of software package, you're using a mouse or a stylus pen, right click is always your options and your left click is always to create an action. So I'm just going to right click in this grey area and select classic, create classic tween, which will turn this grey area purple with this wee black line pointing towards the start point and the end point of my start keyframe and my end keyframe. So what the computer has now done is it's now worked out the path and created these in-between frames for us. Okay, between the start point and the end point. So I can repeat this process, so I'm just going to copy the frame of the circle, I'm going to select it and paste here. I'm going to right click and create the classic tween this time. Okay, so created my tween already, but there's no difference. All I'm going to do is grab that last frame and do the same thing, just select it and on my properties, and I know it was roughly actually 718, so if I click that in place and right click, it should be roughly in the same position as the square, and they'll look as if they're now animated at the same speed, because the distance is pretty much the same, the time is the same, ergo the speed is going to be the same. So let's do the same thing with the triangle. Okay, so we're just going to copy frame, paste the frame in place. I'm going to create my classic tween, select the frame here, click on the properties, and I'm just going to type in 718 again. I accidentally zoomed out there. Back in again. There we go. Okay, so we now have all of the shapes now moving from left to right at the same constant speed using this tween. So what we can do is we could play about a wee bit with these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go roughly to, well, I'll go bang on halfway, 1 second. I'm going to right click and I'm going to convert here to a keyframe, which is now going to give me a new point in this juncture. And it's pretty much, there's no difference, it's not going to affect the animation at any point until I decide to tell it to do so. And there's a number of different things I could do. I could grab this square here and I could move the position of it, which is now meaning that the path, the start point was here, the end point is here. We now have a middle point, so the path should follow this kind of V shape. Like so. Now, similarly I could go down here and I could change the properties. make the square slightly bigger. So we'll see that the square will now increase in size ever so slightly, and then decrease back to the original size information in this keyframe. I could select it and rotate the square. We'll see that it's now starting to rotate. Okay, so there's a number of different ways I could continue to put in, convert more keyframes and move the position, which is going to affect the speed of the animation as well as the movement. If we play this animation, you'll notice that it's extremely fast at this point, slows down at this point, and then is even slower at this point. And that's again just all to do with your physics, your speed equals distance over time. You'll notice that this is taking 10 frames for the shape to move from this side of the screen to that side of the screen. It's then taken roughly 14 frames to move from this side to this side, so the distance is smaller, yeah, and it's also got more time. And then we've got even just the same distance but over a larger period of time, which is obviously then taken a lot smaller. So these keyframes can be easily manipulated, okay, along once you've already generated your classic tween or your shape, your motion tween. We're going to have a wee look at creating alpha, or playing about with alpha, and this is something that's commonly used with text within Flash. So we'll do that as a separate tutorial, but we'll do it just now in the circle as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just go along here and I'm going to convert this to a keyframe, and I'm going to convert another keyframe along here, okay? And at this point, what we'll do is we're going to click on the shape. I'm going to go over here to the Properties tab where it says Color Effect and select Alpha. If I reduce the opacity of that, you'll see that that starts now to fade down to 0, and that information is only recorded within this keyframe. So for example, when I start dragging the slider along, I can see that the ball fades out and starts to fade back in again, because this information here is the same as this and the same as that, which has 100% alpha. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this keyframe along, and I'm going to bring this one along as well, so they're a wee bit closer together. So you see that this change happens a lot quicker. And what we're going to do is just go to this frame, I'm going to select it, I'm going to go to the alpha, I'm going to drop it down to 0. So the ball will now fade out, disappear, and then at this point it starts fading back in again. Okay. If I was to select here and just remove this frame, all that's going to do is it's going to decrease here my the overall length of the animation that I've generated with this shape. Okay, so just be careful if you're wanting to play about with creating something like this with the opacity. Think about your start point, your middle point, and then also your end point. So I've taken that back a couple of stages, and we'll do it this way where we just have one frame in here, and we're going to select it, change the alpha down to 0, so the ball now fades out and then fades back in again. Okay, so that should give you a bit of an overview of how tweens actually work. You'll notice that these all run at constant speeds between one keyframe and the other keyframe, so the way that you're going to be able to adjust that is that looking at the time and also the distance, spreading them apart. Okay, so you can try playing about with that, generate your own kind of custom shapes if you wish, play about with some of the tools, select and convert them to symbols into graphics, and you can start playing about with some of the tweens.